Okay, this is the Migrant's Journey anthropology class, and it hopes to, it's kind of a class in 3 parts. The first part of the semester, we talk about the history of some of the countries where migrants are coming from, and some of the policies in place, and we read a lot of different texts. We watched a lot of different movies and documentaries, and Hutchins randomly sends us articles for us to read at least once every month. And then a portion of our class, not everyone, but a portion of our class went to Arizona. And so we got to have a hands-on experience there and kind of see how some of the policies that we encountered previously work out in real life. And then this next part of the class when we come back is just reflecting on our experience, wrapping up what that meant for us. And then we have a large project at the end. So the majority of the rest of the semester is spent working on that project and talking to each other about that experience.
You know, the way that migrants are identified, talked about, demonized, whether it's in the press or some politicians in particular that use really nasty language. So at some point along the way, I thought this issue is getting big enough and divisive enough to where we could probably have a class on it. And the first class was on campus, and I just remember at some point thinking, I wish I could do with this class what I do in Ecuador, which is a field school. We get out of the classroom. And so I started making calls, and everyone I talked to, they said, our door's open, come on down. And everybody, I never got turned down once. And I thought, okay, then we need to set this up. And so I went down 8 or 10 days in Arizona, going around to these different locations just to make sure that this is going to be safe and just to get the logistics down. And all of it seemed to come together, and then, you know, the option would have been to have it maybe during the summer as a standalone course that just involves several weeks of travel, or to embed it into a semester course and do it in spring break. I decided on that. It was more affordable. You didn't have to pay separate tuition. So we went down the first year, and it was a very, very powerful experience, and then we just kept going.
So being a child of immigrants myself, this was an issue that very closely related to me. I have relatives who are, let's say, closely tied to this issue, and that really pushed me to take this class, as well as the fact that, you know, this is an issue that has always been at the forefront of political conversations for as long as I can remember.
Funny story about me. The first time I ever went to a protest, I was 6, and I played the character of Mary in Mary and Joseph. And we were kind of talking about immigrants and using a Posada-style walk through Lexington, Kentucky, to bring awareness to the issue of immigration and the fact that there are migrants everywhere and this should be a welcoming place. And so we went to a lot of different public buildings and governmental offices and did a kind of symbolic, like, knocking on the door and then being turned away. And so since I was 6, I've been involved, and there's pictures of me like 12 holding a note, like a DACA sign. And so I was more aware of policies and changes, and I also have a lot of friends who are immigrants and have traveled here, and so I have. Also, my dad is an immigrant, but his experience is completely different because he's British, and it's a lot easier for British people to get citizenship. So I was aware of a lot of what was happening, but this class was way more tangible for me. And I grew up in Texas, but nowhere near the border, and so going down to Arizona was a completely different experience than I'd encountered previously.
I grew up in California, and I was friends with a lot of people who had undocumented parents, but I never really knew the extent or the extent of the suffering that happens.
The trip down to Arizona, it was absolutely, it was eye-opening in more ways than one. And, you know, like, we read about these issues in class, we talked about them extensively, but there's a night and day difference between learning about something in a classroom setting, whereas going down to that place where it actually occurred.
Yeah, for the last few years, because it seems to work so well, we've done the same sort of thing. Because I usually go down the day before and just check the hotel and just do some groundwork to make sure everything's ready to go. And then I meet them. We have usually one or two rental vehicles, depending on the size of the group. I'll meet them at the airport. That's usually a Saturday morning. And we pick up some food. There's a Costco near there. I get a sense of what everybody wants because we're out in the desert. We eat a lot of our meals out there, basically living out of a cooler. And then we head south, about halfway between Phoenix and Tucson. There's this really neat state park. We go back there. We have lunch. Some of the students really don't know each other that well, and so it's a great sort of low-pressure environment to get to know each other. And we hang out until everybody feels like they're ready to go, do some hiking, and then we head on down to the hotel, which is in Tucson.
Sunday we went to a ghost town of Ruby, Arizona, and we met this wonderful lady named Leslie.
There's an old mining town that's a ghost town, and it's down 4 miles north of the border, so it takes us down into the middle of where a lot of the traffic, the migrant traffic, is coming through. And there's a caretaker down there, and she lives there by herself out in the middle of the desert.
She was so cool.
And she's seen a little bit of everything. She's had migrants come in, cartel members come in and threaten her. She's had vigilante groups this past year. There's a gate. It's just a regular metal gate, but it's one she would lock and could control people coming in there. And because they thought she was giving aid to migrants, I guess, they hooked a chain up to this gate in the post and pulled everything out, several $1,000s worth of damage. So every year when we go down, she's got a different set of stories that she tells us.
Like hearing her experiences from her point of view was very insightful, and it really showed just how extensive and far-reaching the hate for people who are trying to come here just for a better life is.
So again, it's a way to ease students into it. We usually stop at 3 or 4 places along the way and hike into the desert. And there are places that I'm familiar with where I know migrants stop either for a night or two. There are what are called pickup points where whatever arrangements they've made to get picked up will be along these roads. Some of them are highways, some of them are dirt roads. And so we'll be able to go look at the stuff that they've left behind. Sometimes it's pictures, it's personal notes, phone numbers, phone cards, and just try and make sense of it.
And Monday we went with 2 wonderful ladies, Dora Rodriguez and Gail.
Usually go down to the wall. That's their first visible entrance or exposure to the wall. And we have a couple of people there's a group called the Samaritans, and they meet us down there. And one woman was a migrant that crossed over in a group that a lot of them died. And she tells her story, and they spend the day with us, just going along the wall, showing us what's happening, giving us some updates. And then Tuesday we go out in the desert and plant the crosses with this artist. That's always just a really heavy time because you're arriving at a spot where somebody died and no one was around to recognize that there was a death there.
Particularly the person you could see the stain of their body still in the soil, that was extremely impactful.
We had 4, 3 of them were identified, so we had a name. One of them was a young woman, 22 or 23, so it was about the age of a lot of the students in the group. There was still a spot in the earth under a tree where her body had decomposed, so it was kind of like just a stained, greasy spot in the desert. There were some of her belongings there, some coins and a few other things. So it just, it hit everybody.
Yeah. So that day specifically, we went out and met with the artist, Alvaro Enciso. His project is called Where Dreams Go to Die. And so far, he's planted, I think, almost over 1,000 crosses for people. Yeah. He makes every single one of them. And on every single one of them, there's like a little red, either ceramic or metal dot on it. And that's to represent the death map that is available online. Anyone can go to the Humane Borders death map and see a map of you can see where everybody who's been found has died. And so the crosses degrade, they're wooden and they degrade in like, I think around 2 years or so. No, I think longer than that. But when that's degraded, what is left is that red dot, and that's representative of the map. It's kind of making it physical. It's really an interesting art project. But so then we would get the cross. There'd be a bucket of like powdered cement and a big gallon of water that his assistant, like volunteer, would carry. And I think the farthest we walked was probably about 1.5 miles. But we drove for as long as we could, and then got out on foot when like the car couldn't go any further because it was too dense of like plants and like little riverbeds, or more like creek beds. So then we would be silent and we would walk to the place, and another volunteer had a GPS coordinates so he could see where we were going and knew where we are. But it was really impactful, and he would read the person's name and age, and then we would be silent as we planted them.
And then the next day after that, we went to the medical examiner's office, which was, I can pretty confidently say, it was one of the most difficult days for everyone.
When we go in, they've got a skeleton out that they're working on, because a lot of the bodies found in the desert, the flesh is already gone. It doesn't take long. But this year, we were out planting these crosses for 4 migrants, and one of them was unidentified. And so the person with us said, if you can scour around here to see if there are any other bones, then that might help identify this individual. So we found some bones, and we took them into the medical examiner. And when we did that, she said, I'm just going to show you briefly that body of that individual. So it really struck all of us, because we found some of the bones, and here was the person that they belonged to. And in that case, it was a body that hadn't been cleaned up. There were still dried tendons, and there was a lot more of the humanness associated with that body, including the smell. And that's something that you don't get reading about it in the classroom. It gets very real very quickly. Thursday, lately we've been going to the Border Patrol facilities. They give us a 3-hour tour and talk.
And hearing them talk about their scenario, it showed just how deeply ingrained the racism was within their system, and just how poorly they view migrants who are simply trying to come over and have a good life.
They took us to basically where the wall is, and then this hill that looks out into the distance. As I was like walking around with my classmate Lauren, I looked down, like right at the very edge. There's this piece of white paper that's folded up, and so I pick it up and I unfold it. And on one side there are 2 phone numbers from Arkansas, and on the other, written in Spanish, really short and quickly, is this man who wrote down his story in like a really short note that I had my friend Gisela translate for me when we were standing there. And basically it said, I am leaving where I'm from because I could not pay the fees that the gang members were demanding of him. And so he owned this store, but then because the store was not making enough money and he was being extorted by the gang members that had control of the area, he was not able to keep the store open and then pay them. And so, for example, we've learned about these situations before, so seeing the piece of paper, what did losing this paper do to him? Or like set him, like what kind of life does he have now without that piece of paper? And I just think about that a lot as I carry it with me. So that was the most impactful thing that I saw and found there, was that piece.
Friday is our last full day there, and we're with Humane Borders, which does water drops out in the desert. So they've got these big plastic barrels that they set out, and they've got a spigot, and they've got a flag that shows that, hey, there's water here. If you're having an emergency or a crisis, you need water, here it is. But these vigilante groups often sabotage them. They'll knock the spigot off. They poured kerosene and other toxic things into them, hateful, really hateful stuff. And so when we're out with the volunteers, they share all this with students, and then the students can get some hands-on stuff. They help fill up the tanks, test the water, and so forth. And then Saturday is when we come back, so it's a full week of stuff.
I was really anxious going into this trip with how emotionally heavy it was going to be. I hadn't been on a trip with people my age, and it really restored my faith in humanity, not only meeting some of the amazing workers and activists down at the border, but also just this amazing group of young people my age who were thinking critically, were empathetic, were kind and compassionate. And so I'm really, really grateful that I had this incredible group of people to come with me. And it also, like, the impact I took away was that I just gotta look harder. Like, there are people out there that are just as impassioned, who are just as creative, who are just as excited about the world, but also whose hearts are also breaking around that. And so I think it reminded me that there are really wonderful people out there, and they're not just adults, they're also people my age.
My favorite thing has been the people that I've met through this course, and learning from Dr. Hutchins is always wonderful. He is so invested, and he takes it incredibly seriously, and he has all of these great connections that even when he's teaching, I feel like I'm not just learning from him, but I feel like I'm learning from all of the people that he's learned from, which has just been really wonderful.
It really is an amazing experience to be with students on these trips because I'm with a group of intelligent students that are processing it as well. They're picking up on stuff that I might see. We always have reflection moments. I'm driving a lot of times and they're talking, and so I overhear their conversations. And so it's never the same twice. It's just always really rewarding. It kind of re-energizes you every time you take a trip like that.
And so I absolutely think it's necessary for everyone. I don't care if you're in STEM, you should be taking this class because it humanizes an issue that feels so big and so broad to a lot of people.
So if we had had a nursing student this year, last year, they could immediately have helped. We had a guy in the camp this year that was from Honduras and had walked for God only knows how many miles. And he was in pretty rough shape. His feet, he had his shoes and socks off when he was in the camp. His feet were bleeding. And so we helped clean him up and get him bandaged and everything. But a nursing student, that would have been, the ideal situation to help out. And I think it helps, nurses deal with, people that are in crisis all the time. They might be people from other parts of the world. And so these cross-cultural skills are also really important.
You get to learn so much about just being a human in this class, especially as Americans. We have so much privilege and we're so blessed here to be able to understand that not everybody has it like we do, and to be able to be empathetic towards that and kind. So it just, I think, helps you become a better person.
Honestly, the day that he can no longer teach it and take students to the Arizona border is a day that we have won, as a society, because that means that there's not problems to discuss to take us there for and to witness. So
I highly recommend taking this class. Mm-hmm.